The book that I have is actually a translation of Fariduddin Attar's classic, which was written in 12th century, and now, and probably for over many centuries, it is considered a world classic. The translation that I have, it's by Afghan Darbandi, who is an Iranian woman, and Dick Davis. They are husband and wife. Actually, the story is that Dick Davis, after doing his masters from Cambridge University, he went to Iran in 1970, and he taught at University of Tehran for some time. And there he fell in love with Iranian culture and civilization. And there he also met his future wife, Afghan Darbandi. And later on, of course, they collectively translated this text. Now, this book, it doesn't have the epilogue and the invocation part, but the 2011 version that now we have in the library, this one also has translations of invocation and epilogue. Now, this book is actually a translation of this Persian version. This is 1978 edition of Mantiq-ut-Tair, written by, of course, Fariduddin Attar, who is otherwise more famous for another very popular text, which is called Tazkaratul Awliya. Now, as far as Fariduddin Attar is concerned, obviously he was a very famous mystic, and he was born in 12th century, sometime between 1120 and 1157, and he died sometime between 1193 and 1235 AD. Now, you can read the introduction, and in the introduction you'll get to know a bit about his biography as well. Now, apart from that, as I've already mentioned, that this book is now considered a world classic. It's also there in Norton Anthology on World Literature, and it has, of course, translation also has received various awards. Now, this English translation, I would say, is much better than the Urdu translation, this one. So I hope this translator doesn't listen to this. But this one is also in our library, but I think that it would be better if you read this translation, because a lot of effort has gone into it. So in the original Masnavi, there are 22 syllables in each line, and they have translated each line with 22 syllables, and then the couplets are also rhymed. Now, as far as, before I begin to talk about the book, it is usually in the introduction as well, it is written that it's a book about the tasawwuf, which is a doctrine of Islam, a doctrine of Islam. Well, I think that somehow whenever we engage with any text which claims to be about the tasawwuf, we somehow think that it is somehow at odds with mainstream Islam. Now, the reading that I have and the way I look at it, and I've discussed with scholars, now I have no claim that I have this understanding of the tasawwuf. I'm just talking about it as a reader. Now, the understanding that I have, well, if we talk about Islam, it has these three major institutions. And these three have always operated since the times of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And if you listen to the ayat that was recited at the beginning, and this identity of Holy Prophet, that he is also, that he does this, yatlu ayati wa yuzakkihim. So this category is then reflected in one pillar of Islam, which is tasawwuf, because other two pillars being, of course, Shariat and also Siyasat. So as far as this Islamic comprehensive aspect of Islam is concerned, Shariat is one part, Tariqat is another part, and the third one is tasawwuf or Tariqat. So this is something that I wanted to clarify, because later on there might be a few questions related to it. Now, as far as this book is concerned, it is an allegory. So it deals with, of course, the tasawwuf, which can be defined in so many different ways. It can be about self-discovery. It can be about cleansing of our inner self. It can be about spiritual fulfillment. It can be about, of course, knowing God. So as it is said, or probably it's also in the Quran, that whosoever recognizes himself can recognize the Almighty. Since it's an allegory, so it's a story of birds. So when the story begins, when the book begins, birds have gathered, they have assembled together, and they are led by a bird which is wiser and which has the ability to be their guide. Now the confusion is, they say that all creatures of the world, they have some king, but we don't have any king. We don't have someone that we might go to, or someone can tell us what we are supposed to do or what is the purpose of our life. So they seek Hupu's advice, Hudhud जिसको हम कहते हैं, क्योंकि उसकी हमेशा सिग्निफिकेंस हमारे यहाँ भी है, यूसुफ अलैहिस्सलाम के वाक़े में भी और हज़रत सुलेमान अलैहिस्सलाम के वाक़े में भी हमने सुनी है. So Hupu then tells them that there is a king, and that king is Simurg, and that Simurg lives far off in mountains, and the journey is really very difficult. But what we can do is that we can go to Simurg and we can request him, or we can ask him, or we can discover him, so that he may become our king. So that's the idea which he gives. And they accept that idea, and then all of them initially, in that excitement, they say, all right, let's go, and let's go to the valley of Simurg. So all of them jump that bandwagon, and all the birds start clamoring, yes, we should all go. But the moment he explains that it's difficult and that you have to travel or fly through so many valleys, and then you will be able to reach the valley of Simurg, then they begin to think about their problems. Now, since it's an allegory, and it's so interesting that when these birds go to Hupu, or when they share their own problems, or when they give their own excuses, it's so relevant to our condition. So honestly, since I've read the book many years ago, I also look at my students as these birds. Now each student has some sort of a problem, and whenever you talk about the way Dr. Ahmed Bilal was talking about our purpose and our mission and why are we in this world, so the moment we talk about it, most of the students will have some problem. They wouldn't be interested in that debate. Some of them will be interested in it, that debate. Somehow they would think, well, all right, fine, these things are plausible, but this is not for me. This is probably for someone else. And somebody would say, well, I cannot, okay, I can understand it. I can follow this path. I can somehow be a part of this discussion, but then at the end of the day, it's just my GPA which matters. Or that, all right, fine, this is for them, but I'm a girl and I'll eventually get married. So this sort of discussion is probably for the boys, not for me. So, and there are so many other excuses. As he said, for instance, some students, or us as human beings, we are probably thinking too much about these worldly gains. What will I get? What kind of bank balance will I have after a few years? So in that sense, this book is really amazing, and as I'll share with you a few excerpts from it. So they begin to fly. So initially, Nightingale comes and she has, or he has her problem, his problem, and Nightingale says, well, I live just for the rose, and Simurg doesn't matter as far as I'm concerned if the rose is around. So if I'm in a garden and the rose is there, I don't need to fly to the valley of Simurg. And then Hupu replies. And when he replies, he gives an argument, and at the same time, he narrates a story, or an anecdote, or a hikayat. So this book is full of these stories, full of these hikayat. And as we know through Rumi and through Eastern traditions, that hikayat has always been used as a tool to convey a message. So the book is filled with these interesting stories. That's why I would strongly recommend that the moment you begin to read this book, you cannot put it down. It is so addictive. So he narrates a story and then he offers a reply. So one very interesting aspect of this book is, when I read the book, I kept thinking, what kind of a bird am I? What is my problem? What kind of a psychological aspect is my blind spot that I'm missing? So that self-discovery also continues with the book. And then Hawk is there, and Hawk says, well, I'm already in the court. So I sit with kings. Why should I go to the valley of Seymour? And then he responds to it. So there are so many birds. So you have finch, and you have parrot, and you have partridge, and you have nightingale, and you have hawk, and you have other kinds of birds. And those birds also reflect and represent human psychology, various aspects of human psychology. So that is also something extremely interesting about this book, and that is what makes it so relevant. And these days, we are so used to relying on all Western paradigms. Like the institution of a university, it's simply West-centric, it's Eurocentric. And this sort of knowledge, it's simply sidelined, it's marginalized. And the moment we engage with it and understand it, we really feel enabled. Now, whenever I discuss this with my students or whenever I talk about it, there are so many problems of today's world that we are able to kind of defeat when we engage with this sort of paradigm. So let's see, since we are also trying to decolonize our university systems and indigenize knowledge, so let's hope that texts of this sort will also become part of our higher education. So, and then they keep on flying. So after they travel a valley and then they enter into another valley, their birds keep coming to Hupu and they keep telling him about their problems, and he keeps convincing them. Wow. So what happens is that finally there is a bird, and that bird asks Hupu how much of the journey is left, and he responds by saying, well, there are 7 more valleys to go. So there are 7 valleys, and these 7 valleys can also be the valleys of self-discovery, and can also be the valleys that we have to cross to reach the Almighty, or Khuda, or our Creator, understand who that entity is. So these valleys are, for instance, the first one in the Persian edition, we have the Wadi-e-Talab. So first of all, it's that. So Talab, Talab-e-Ilm, Talab-e-Ilm, so that's the first valley, Wadi-e-Talab. Then the second valley that we have is Wadi-e-Ishq, or the valley of love, that you have to cross. And then the third valley is the valley of Marifat, or the valley of insight that you have to cross. And then the fourth valley is the valley, or Wadi-e-Istaghna, or the valley of detachment. And then the next valley is the valley Wadi-e-Tawheed, or the valley of unity. And then the next valley is the Wadi-e, I somehow am in love with the idea, that's Wadi-e-Hayrat, or the valley of bewilderment. And then the final valley is the valley Wadi-e-Faqr, or valley of poverty and nothingness. Now, of course, these are all, we read that these are all mystical terms, but at the same time, all these valleys mean something to us as well. It's not that esoteric that we are unable to get anything out of it. So now in the final part, which is going to take some time, I'll be taking you through the text, and I'll be reading out these couplets from various sections that I've already highlighted. So the first one is when it all begins. Now, I'm reading this, and you will see that, so it begins like this. Before it, we also have invocation part. So in the original Persian text, it starts with, of course, Hamd, and then you have Naat, and then you have this invocation to Sahaba Karam, and then later on the text begins. Now in this translation we don't have that part, but in 2011 edition we also have translations of those parts. So it begins like this. Dear Hupu, so Hupu is that bird, guide. Dear Hupu, welcome. You will be our guide. It was on you King Solomon relied, King Solomon Hazrat Solomon, to carry secret messages between his court and distant Sheba's lovely queen. He knew your language and you knew his heart. As his close confidant, you learnt the art. And it goes on like this. And then Hupu begins to address these birds. And so first of all, he engages with this little bird, this finch. And he says, "And you are welcome, finch. Rise up and play those liquid notes that steal men's hearts away. Like Moses, you have seen the flames burn high on Sinai's slopes, and there you go to fly. Like him, avoid cruel Pharaoh's hand and seek your promised home on Sinai's mountain peak." Now, you can see how Hupu addresses each bird and tries to bring out the best in that personage or the best in that bird. It's about self-discovery. It's creating that talab. Now, what Dr. Ahmed Bilal said, realizing that what it means to be human. Does it mean to be a machine, or does it mean to be connected with other human beings? And then based on that, how are you going to prioritize? So finally, he says to the finch, "There you will understand unspoken words, too subtle for the ears of mortal birds." So he's encouraging that finch, that bird, to have that in her. And later on the very first page, he addresses the partridge. And partridge is, of course, quite proud of his own beauty. So he says, "Welcome, dear partridge, how you strut with pride along the slopes of wisdom's mountainside. Let laughter ring out where your feet have trod. Then strike with all your strength the door of God. Destroy the mountain of the self." Now again and again, it's about nafs. It's about nafs. And as it is said in all mystical literature that we read, the biggest part of it, or the most difficult part of it, is to, of course, crush this self of yours. Nafs jo hai, nafs amara. Yeah. So again and again it's about that. And in this English translation, that the word that we have is self. Destroy the mountain of the self, and here from ruined rocks a camel will appear. Beside its new-born noble hooves, a stream of honey mingled with white milk will gleam. Drive on this beast, and at your journey's end, Saleh will greet you as a long-lost friend. And then he goes on and he addresses the falcon, and he goes on and he addresses the pigeon. So for instance, this is the way he talks to a pigeon. "Dear pigeon, welcome. With what joy you yearn to fly away. How sadly you return. Your heart is wrung with grief. You shared the jail that Jonah knew, the belly of a whale. The self has swallowed you for its delight. How long will you endure its mindless spite? Cut off its head, seek out the moon and fly beyond the utmost limits of the sky." So this is how he keeps on encouraging all these birds, that they have to embark on that journey to the valley of Seymour. So the birds assemble, and the Hupu tells them of the Seymour. So this is what he says. "The world's birds gathered for their conference and said, 'Our constitution makes no sense. All nations in the world require a king. How is it we alone have no such thing? Only a kingdom can be justly run. We need a king and must inquire for one.'" So that's how they think about the king. And then he tells them about the Seymour. And he says, Hupu, "It was in China, late one moonless night, the Seymour first appeared to mortal sight. He let a feather float down through the air, and rumors of its fame spread everywhere. Throughout the world, men separately conceived an image of its shape, and all believed their private fantasies uniquely true. In China, still this feather is on view. Now, as in mystical literature, it is said that whether it is Ram or whether it is Bhagwan or whether it is Allah or it's Khuda or it's God, all these words refer to the same reality. So that is reflected here, that Seymour has different conceptions in different parts of the world. But it was seen in China, it is mentioned over here. And whence comes the saying you have heard, no doubt, seek knowledge unto China, seek it out. So that's how he utilizes it. Now this is really interesting. This Nightingale's excuse. I would like to read it and then of course we'll quickly move on. The Nightingale says, I'm in love with the rose. I need not to fly to the valley of Seymour. But that is of course a misconception. All of us, as it is said, that we need this understanding, this marifat, or we need to realize who our Creator is. So the Nightingale made his excuses first. His pleading notes described the lover's thirst. And through the crowd, hushed silence spread as he descanted on love's scope and mystery. The secrets of all love are known to me. वो बुलबुल अब कह रहा है कि मुझे सब पता है. अब ये कितना बड़ा होता है मामला जिसमें हम सोचते हैं कि I know everything. Oh, I know everything. The secrets of all love are known to me, he crooned. Throughout the darkest night, my song resounds, and to my retinue belong the sweet notes of melancholy lute, the plaintive wailing of the love-sick flute. When love speaks in the soul, my voice replies in accents plangent as the ocean sighs. The man who hears this song spurns reason's rule. Grey wisdom is content to be love's fool. My love is for the rose. I bow to her. From her dear presence, I could never stir. Ab ye Nightingale goes on, and he replies, Tihupu answered him, Dear Nightingale, this superficial love which makes you quail is only for the outward show of things. Renounce delusion and prepare your wings for our great quest. Sharp thorns defend the rose, and beauty such as hers too quickly goes. So this rose is also a symbol of worldly love, that it's going to fade away. Whatever you have inside you, whatever fitrat that you have inside you as human being, it can never be satisfied with this worldly love. You need to transcend this boundary. So it goes on, and we have another bird, that's the hawk. And hawk, I've told you, hawk says, well, I'm already in the court. I don't need any kind of Seymour. And Hupu answers him, the Hupu said, Dear hawk, you set great store by superficial graces and ignore the all-important fact of purity. A king with rivals in his dignity is no true king. The Seymour rules alone and entertains no rivals to his throne. So this Hupu, of course, has a very tough job, and he keeps on convincing these birds, different birds. For instance, the finch says, well, I'm so feeble. How can I fly this far? I'm so weak. I'm nobody. You shouldn't even be asking this to me, that I should even think about flying off to the valley of Seymour. I'm so weak, I'm so feeble. Her feeble frame trembled from head to toe. A nervous flame, she chirped. I'm less sturdy than a hare, and lack the courage that my betters share. My feathers are too weak to carry me the distance to the Seymour sanctuary. And then he responds to that complaint and says, you teasing little bird, this humble ostentation is absurd. Now this phrase is so interesting. Ostentatiousness is of course dikhawa, and humble is inkisari. So this humble ostentation is absurd. तो जैसे humility and inkisari के बारे में कहते हैं ना कि humility is a funny thing. The moment you think you have it, you have lost it. तो उसी तरह अब ये उस humility को वो कह रहा है कि ये खत्म करो तुम, ये तुम्हारी. If all of us are destined for the fire, then you too must ascend the burning fire. Get ready for the road. You can't fool me. Sew up your beak, I loathe hypocrisy. कि बस चोंच बंद करो, चलो तैयारी पकड़ो, तुम्हें भी साथ ही चलना है. तुम्हें अगर तख्लीक किया गया है, तो this is in you. If you are a human being, if you are made, if you are born, if you have consciousness, all this is for you as well. So then the next step, the other birds protest and the hoopoe tells them of their relationship with the seaworm. अब उनको समझा रहा है कि तुम्हारा सबका एक ताल्लुक है, तुम ऐसे डोर से बंधे हुए हो अपने उस खालिक से, which can be a seaworm here in the symbol of seaworm. और वो सबको कह रहा है कि आप सब ने चलना है. How could they gain the seaworm? Such a goal belongs to those who discipline the soul. चूँकि वही वाली बात हो रही है अपने सेल्फ को तहजीब बनाने की, जो हमारे कुरान पाक के अंदर यहाँ लफ्ज़ आया है, जो अभी आयत तिलावत की गई थी, वयुज़क्की हिम, के पाक करना नफ्स को. ये भी तो एक कैटेगरी प्रॉफिट मोहम्मद सल्लल्लाहु अलैहि वसल्लम की थी कि वो दिलों को और नीयत की तस्हीह, जिसको किसी बड़े सिंपल अंदाज में कहते हैं कि तसव्वुफ कोई हवा में उड़ने का नाम नहीं है या कश्फ व करामात का नाम नहीं होता, ये अपनी नीयत को साफ करने का नाम है. और उसकी हम सबको ज़रूरत हमेशा से रहती है कि क्या कोई अपना इनकलाबी कलाम इसलिए लिख रहा है कि अपनी क्लास बदल ले, या वो इसलिए लिख रहा है कि हकीकत में इज्तमाई तौर पर माशरे के अंदर एक बेहतर माशरा तमाम इंसानों के लिए कायम हो सके. सो अब दरमियान में बर्ड्स जो हैं वो हूपू को भी क्वेश्चन करते हैं कि भाई हमें तो हमें कैसे पता चलेगा, तुम हमें सही राह दिखाने वाले हो. और वो उसका भी जवाब देता है. और रास्ते में वो अपने उसी हूपू को अपना लीडर भी चूज कर लेते हैं. इसी तरह अब हिकायत के हवाले से, तो अब जब ये बर्ड्स फ्लाई कर रहे हैं, the birds are frightened by the emptiness of the way. अब उड़ना तो शुरू हो गए, कुछ नजर नहीं आ रहा. अब हम सब में ये जो होती है, क्या कहते हैं इसको, शॉर्ट साइटेडनेस. जैसे वो एक खूबसूरत अंदाज में अमजद साहब ने भी अपनी नज़र में कहा है ना कि वो बच्चा शब में एक बीज बोए, शाम को एक बीज बोए और शब में बारहा उठे और देखे कि पौधा कहाँ तक है. तो हम भी कोई छोटा सा अच्छा अमल कर लेते हैं ना, फिर देखना शुरू हो जाते हैं कि मेरे सर के ऊपर कोई रूहानियत का हाला बन गया कि मैंने ये जो है ना ये इतना अच्छा काम किया है, या किसी को खराब दे दिया, या कोई सेल्फलेस काम कर लिया. तो अब ये उड़ना शुरू तो हो गए हैं, लेकिन अभी बयाबान ही है और कुछ भी नहीं नजर आ रहा, और अभी वादियाँ शुरू ही नहीं हुई. तो अब ये उसको कंप्लेन कर रहे हैं और कह रहे हैं कि एम्प्टीनेस ऑफ द वे है, कुछ पता ही नहीं चल रहा. तो यहाँ इन्होंने ये एक हिकायत शेख बायजीद बुस्तामी की लेकर आए हैं, छोटी सी. तो ये मैं आपको यहाँ पे पढ़ के सुनाता हूँ. तो वो कह रहे हैं, वन मूनलिट नाइट शेख बायजीद अट्रैक्टेड by the sight of such refulgent brilliance, clear as day, across the sleepy city took his way, and thence into the desert, where he saw unnumbered stars adorning heaven's floor. He walked a little and became aware that not a sound disturbed the desert air, that no one moved in that immensity save him. His heart grew numb, and gradually pure terror touched him. "Oh great God," he cried, "your dazzling palace beckons far and wide. Where are the courtiers who should throng this court?" अब वो डेजर्ट में पहुंचे हुए हैं और खुदा को पुकार के कह रहे हैं कि आपकी पैलेस है, लेकिन कोई ना दरबार है, ना कोई यहाँ कोई रौनक मेला ही नहीं, बिल्कुल बयाबान है. तो वो शेख बायजीद को जवाब मिलता है, "Wanderer, you are distraught. Be calm. Our glorious king cannot admit all comers to his court." कि जो हमारा ग्रेट किंग है वो हर अरे वरे को थोड़ी आने देता है अपने दरबार में. It is not fit that every rascal who sleeps out the night should be allowed to glimpse its radiant light. Men, most are turned back, and few perceive the throne. Among 100,000, there is one. So, तो ये एक हकायत है शेखबा यजीद की, और इसके थ्रू वो उन बर्ड्स को हौसला दे रहा है कि कोई नहीं, अभी तो सफर शुरू हुआ है. इसी तरह आगे चलते हैं, और एक बर्ड दरमियान में, अब ये बर्ड्स अपनी अपनी कंप्लेंट्स कर रही हैं, सब साइकोलॉजिकल, बिल्कुल आप इसको हमारी मॉडर्न कंसेप्शन ऑफ साइकोलॉजी से लिंक कर सकते हैं, और ये सब इनर जर्नीज हमारी होती हैं. तो एक बर्ड कंप्लेन कर रही है सिंफुलनेस की, कहती है मैं तो बड़े गुनाहगार हूं. Another bird complained, sin stains my soul. How can the wicked ever reach the goal? How can a soul unclean as noisome flies toward the Seymour's mountains hope to rise? When sinners leave the path, what power can bring such stragglers to the presence of the king? तो जो इंसान अपने ऊपर शक करता है, तो ये अब इस कैफियत में कि मैं तो वैसे ही बड़ी गुनाहगार हूँ, तो मैं भला सीमोर की दरबार में कैसे पेश हो सकती हूँ, और यकीनन सीमोर इसका जवाब देता है. इसी तरह एक और बर्ड कंप्लेन करती है अपनी इनडिसाइसिवनेस की, कि मेरे अंदर तो कुव्वत फैसला ही नहीं है. अब ये सारे वो चीजें जो हम जानते हैं कि हमारे अंदर होती है, मेरे में तो कुव्वत फैसला ही नहीं है. और वो बर्ड क्या कह रही है? Another bird declared, as you can see, I lack the organs of virility. Each moment I prefer a different tree. कभी इस पे बैठती हूँ, कभी इस पे. I'm drunk, devout. The world's then his caught between. No, it isn't. Yes, it is. बुलिया की जाना मैं कौन? ना मैं मूसा ना फिरौन. अब वो indecisiveness की कैफियत है. The flesh will send me drinking, then I'll find the praise of God awakening in my mind. एक मौके पे शराब पीने जाती हूँ, एक में जाती हूँ खुदा याद आता है बड़े अच्छे तरह. What should I do between these two extremes, imprisoned by conflicting needs and dreams? अब उसका जवाब हुकू देता है जो मैं नहीं पढ़ूंगा, इसके लिए आपको किताब लेनी पड़ेगी और पढ़नी पड़ेगी. एक और बर्ड कंप्लेन कर रही है अपने नफ्स की, सेल्फ की, और वो कह रही है ये नफ्स चूंकि मेरे साथ है ना, तो फिर मैं कहीं भी नहीं पहुंच सकना. My enemy is that veteran of highway robberies. ये डाकू, ये नफ्स मेरे अंदर ही है जो राहज़न है. Myself, how can I travel on the way with such a follower? The dog won't pay the least attention to a word I say. The dog I knew is gone, and in his place a slavering wolf stalks by me, pace for pace. कि ये नफ्स मेरे साथ जुड़ा हुआ है, पीछे लगा हुआ है. How can I proceed? फिर एक बर्ड आ जाती है, वो कहती है मेरे अंदर तो कंजूसी बड़ी, और वो कहती है I love gold alone. It's life to me, like marrow to a bone. When I have gold, I blossom like flower. With restless pride, I revel in its power. अब उसका जवाब, फिर उसकी हिकायत आगे आ रही. ये तो कोई सियासत आ रही. यकीनन ऐसा ही है. अल्हाकुमुत तकासुर, ये वही वाली कैफियत है. फिर एक बर्ड है जो बड़ी ऑस्टेंटेशियस है, उसको जरा बनाओ सिंगार, मेकअप शेकअप, ये सब बड़ा पसंद है. बनना सवरना, मर्दों के लिए क्या कहना चाहिए, अच्छे से कपड़े पहनना, वो ऑस्टेंटेशियस बर्ड है. और वो कह रही है My happiness comes from the splendid things which I possess. My palace walls inlaid with gold excite astonishment in all who see the light. They are a world of joy to me. How could I wrench my heart from this surpassing good? There I am, king, all bow to my commands. Shall I court ruin in the desert sands? Shall I give up this realm and live without my certain glory in a world of doubt? What rational mind would give up paradise for wanderings filled with pain and sacrifice? कि मेरे पास तो ये जाओ जलाल मालो दौलत, नई मॉडल की करोला, होंडा सिविक, और मेरे पास तो आई एम अ टेन्योर्ड प्रोफेसर, और जो है मेरे तो इतनी, मेरे लिए तो ये सफर नहीं है. आई हैव ऑलरेडी अचीव्ड एवरीथिंग. So this goes on, and इसी तरह एक बर्ड है जिसको अपनी जो है वो beloved याद आ रहा है मौके पे, तो वो वापस जाना चाह रही है। अब ये वादियों का सफर जब शुरू हो रहा है, अब ये बड़ी अहम बात है। अब I've taught for 18 years. I hope I'll just finish in 5-7 minutes. तो अब ये है कि एक और बड़ी अहम बात है जो बहुत ज़्यादा, और it's not my gender bias or anything. I've taught for 18 years and there are many teachers here and all of us know that most of our students now are women, girls. अब ये एक बड़ा मसला होता है कि वो ये बात हमेशा आ जाती है, नहीं ये सारी बातें ठीक है लेकिन ये हमेशा मेरे ही साथ ऐसा क्यों होता है। तो ये जो एक कंप्लेन होती है बैड लक की कि व्हाई मी, तो वो एक कंसेप्शन में होता है कि पूरी दुनिया एक तरफ मैं एक तरफ, बस ये होता ही मेरे साथ। तो अब एक बर्ड है जो कि कंप्लेन कर रही है, a bird complains of his bad luck and says, hoo-hoo, it's no good. Things never happen as I had hoped they would. I've spent my time in misery since birth, the most unlucky wretch in all the earth. My heart knows so much torment that it seems each atom of my body raves and screams. My life has trodden out a hopeless way. God damn me if I've had one happy day. These sorrows lock me in myself. How can I undertake this journey which you planned? If I were happy, I would gladly start. What stops me is this sorrow in my heart. What can I do? Look, I appeal to you. I've told you everything. What can I do? और हुपू इसका जवाब क्या दे रहा है, बड़ा इंटरेस्टिंग। हुपू said, how arrogant you are to think your wretched self so singular कि तुम्हें लगता है गम खुद तुम्हें ही है पूरी दुनिया में। The disappointments of this world will die in less time than the blinking of an eye. And as the earth must pass by the earth, don't even glance at it. Know what it's worth. What empty foolishness it is to care for what must one day be dispersed to air. Now, of course, that quintessential Islamic or religious concept, even I think in all Eastern belief systems we have this concept that this world, and even in science, it is absolutely clear that this world has to come to an end. So, this section then comes to an end, and in the next section, now since they are traveling and traveling, a new phase of this journey begins, where these birds begin to think that now they are really very spiritual. और अब उनको वो आना शुरू हो गया है। अब नफ्स का जो अगला धोखा होता है एक अच्छा काम करके कि फिर लगता है ये तो मैं ही हूँ, कितना मैं नेक हूँ, कितने मैं नेक काम करता हूँ। अब ये अगले वो फेज शुरू हो गई है इन बर्ड्स की। और मसलन एक बर्ड कहती है, a bird claims that he lives only, अब ये दावा आ गया यहाँ पे। तो एक बर्ड कहती है मेरी तो अब जिंदगी ओढ़ना बिचोना अब सीमुर्गी बन गया। तो ये उसको भी जवाब देता है और कहता है the seamurg isn't won by boasts of who you are and what you have done. Don't brag of love. He is not deceived by lies, and no one pulls the wool across his eyes. His call is like some lightly wafted breeze. Now this is amazing, this image. His call is like some lightly wafted breeze, lifting the veil from hidden mysteries. Then he will draw you to himself alone. Your place will be with him beside his throne. Though if mere pride of place prompts your desire, your love prepares you for eternal fire. तो ये अब एक फेज है कि जिसमें बर्ड्स आके और ये दावा करना शुरू हो जाती हैं कि हमें तो बड़ा सुकून है, अब तो हम अपनी बड़ी ज़बरदस्त रूहानी कैफियत में पहुंच चुके हैं। तो ये अब सिलसिला चलना शुरू हो जाता है। फिर आगे चलते हैं मज़ीद। अब एक बर्ड पूछती है कि अच्छा जी अब कितना सफ़र बाकी रह गया, तो अब तो बहुत सफ़र ट्रैवल कर लिया। तो अब वो उसको बताता है कि बेसिकली अभी तो 7 वादियाँ पड़ी हुई और उन 7 वादियों का वो जिक्र करता है जिनका नाम मैं आपको बता चुका हूँ। सबसे पहले वैली ऑफ क्वेस्ट है, उसके बाद जो है वो वैली ऑफ लव है, उसके बाद जो है वो वैली कौन सी थी, उसके बाद वैली ऑफ इनसाइट है, और उसके बाद वी हैव वैली ऑफ, उसके बाद एस्तावना, वैली ऑफ डिटैचमेंट, फिर वैली ऑफ यूनिटी, फिर वैली ऑफ बिविल्डरमेंट, एंड फिर वैली ऑफ पॉवर्टी एंड नॉटनेस। और इन सारों से गुजरने के बाद ये सीमोर की वैली में पहुंचते हैं। इन द बेस्ट इंटरेस्ट ऑफ टाइम आई एम स्किपिंग ऑल दैट पार्ट, क्योंकि आप सब यकीनन बुक पढ़ना चाहेंगे। अगर वैसे खैर वो भी हम नहीं कहते, ये ना हो कि फिर मार्केटिंग का इल्जाम लग जाए। वी डोंट गेट एनी कट फ्रॉम दीज बुक सेल्स एट ऑल। और फाइनली अब ये आखिरी पार्ट है जो मैं पढ़ूंगा, सिर्फ चंद लाइंस, जिसमें द बर्ड्स डिस्कवर द सीमोर। और होता ये कि कहानी में कि फाइनली व्हेन दे रीच द वैली ऑफ सीमोर, सो देयर इज दैट पैलेस ऑफ सीमोर, एंड इट्स अ पैलेस which is surrounded by mirrors. So finally in all these valleys what happens is that in each valley many of the birds, they keep flying back. So initially there were thousands of birds, and by the time they reach the valley of Seymour there are only 30 birds. 30. There are only 30 birds, and they are flying and they look at their own image and they realize that they themselves are a part of Seymour. Because in Farsi, in Persian, sea means 30 and mur means birds. So this journey that they experienced, it was not just something external that they discovered Seymour who was in the outside world. They themselves were the Seymour together.
Wow.
Man arafa nafsahu faqad.
Yeah. So there in the Seymour's radiant face, and if you look at all these images, artistic images of the Seymour, so this bird is comprised of smaller birds, and this probably, I don't have that understanding, but probably this concept of wahdatul wujud, that all of us human beings, we are connected, and that in the world, in the imaginal world or the alam-e-amsal, we have one ideal human being, Imam-e-Nau Insani, as it is said. So probably we are all part of the same reality. So finally they are there. There in the Seymour's radiant face they saw themselves, the Seymour of the world. With awe they gazed and dared at last to comprehend. They were the Seymour and the journey's end. उनकी अपनी ज़ात ही उसी journey की end थी. They see the Seymour. At themselves they stare and see a second Seymour standing there. They look at both and see the two are one. That this is that this, the goal is one. They ask, but inwardly they make no sound. The meaning of these mysteries that confound their puzzled ignorance. How is it true that, this is the last line I'm going to read, that we is not distinguished here from you? Thank you very much.